January 1942. Just weeks after the shock of the attack on Pearl Harbor, America was desperate for a weapon that could strike back in a way Japan would never expect. That's when an unlikely idea reached the White House, a plan so strange it sounded like science fiction. The project would later be known as the Bat Bomb. The concept was terrifyingly simple. Japanese cities at the time were largely built from wood and paper. Instead of dropping massive bombs that destroyed a single area, why not unleash thousands of tiny incendiary fires at once, fires that would spread uncontrollably? The delivery system would not be machines, but living creatures. The design was carefully engineered. Scientists selected Mexican free-tailed bats because they could carry more than their body weight and fly long distances. The bats were placed into special refrigerated containers to put them into hibernation. Each bat had a tiny, timed incendiary charge attached to its chest using surgical glue and a small string harness. These miniature bombs were lightweight but capable of igniting wooden structures within minutes. The container itself was shaped like a bomb. Once dropped from an aircraft, it would deploy by parachute, open mid-air, and release thousands of bats. As they awakened from hibernation, their natural instinct would drive them to seek shelter in rooftops, attics, and barns, perfect fire traps hidden inside enemy cities. Testing began in 1943 at the U.S. Army Air Force's base in Carlsbad, New Mexico. Early trials were chaotic. In one famous accident, several bats escaped during a test and set parts of the base on fire, destroying vehicles and even a hangar. Ironically, this disaster proved the weapon worked. Later controlled tests reportedly showed that the bat bomb caused more widespread fire damage than conventional incendiary bombs in similar conditions. The U.S. military invested around $2 million into development, and by 1944, the weapon was nearing operational readiness. But here's the part most people don't know. The bat bomb was never used in combat. It was scheduled for potential deployment against Japanese cities in 1945, possibly targeting urban industrial zones. However, the project was delayed, and military leadership shifted priority toward a far more devastating weapon under development, the atomic bomb. When the Manhattan Project accelerated, funding for the bat bomb was canceled. Officials believed it would not be ready in time to influence the war. So, how many soldiers did it kill? None in battle. The bat bomb never saw active combat deployment. Its only destruction occurred during testing accidents on American soil. Yet military analysts at the time estimated that if deployed over major Japanese cities, it could have ignited thousands of simultaneous fires, potentially causing massive structural destruction and high casualties. Some reports even suggested it might have caused more widespread urban fire damage than single large bombs because of the unpredictable spread of hundreds of small ignition points. Imagine it. Thousands of silent shapes dropping from the sky at dawn, disappearing into rooftops, and minutes later, entire blocks erupting in flames, with no warning sirens, no visible bombers overhead at the moment of ignition, a weapon that turned nature itself into an incendiary delivery system. It sounds unreal, almost mythical, yet it was fully funded, engineered, and nearly deployed during World War II. And if history had shifted by just a few months, the bat bomb might have changed the way the Pacific War ended forever. The real power of the bat bomb was not just in the explosives, it was in the psychology behind it. Military planners believed that a weapon like this could create thousands of separate fires at once, forcing emergency crews into chaos. Instead of responding to one impact zone, defenders would have to fight hundreds of ignition points scattered across a city. The goal was to overwhelm infrastructure, delay response time, and create uncontrolled urban damage. Engineers refined the timing mechanisms so the incendiary devices would activate only after the bats had settled into dark, enclosed spaces. The idea was that the fires would begin inside buildings, not in open streets, making them harder to detect immediately. During development, researchers studied bat behavior in detail. They experimented with different attachment methods, ensuring the tiny devices would not hinder flight. The harness design had to be lightweight but secure. Too heavy, and the bats could not fly. Too loose, and the devices would fall off prematurely. Every adjustment required careful biological testing. The refrigeration system inside the bomb casing was another critical innovation. By slowing the bat's metabolism, scientists could delay their awakening until the container opened at the correct altitude. Precision was everything. This was not just a weapon, but a coordinated biological operation. But as testing continued, questions grew louder inside military leadership. Some officers worried about reliability. Weather conditions could affect bat behavior. Strong winds might scatter them unpredictably. Others questioned whether the fires would concentrate in strategic targets or simply spread randomly. By 1944, attention inside the U.S. military shifted toward more conventional strategic bombing campaigns, and eventually toward a far more powerful breakthrough that was nearing completion. Funding priorities changed quickly, and experimental projects that seemed promising suddenly lost support. Despite never being deployed in combat, the bat bomb remains one of the most unusual weapons ever seriously considered in wartime history. It represents a moment when innovation pushed boundaries in unexpected directions, when engineers, biologists, and military strategists worked together to turn a natural creature into a delivery system. It also reflects the intensity of global conflict during World War II, when nations explored every possible advantage, no matter how unconventional. Today, the bat bomb is remembered less for what it did and more for what it could have done. It stands as a symbol of experimental warfare, an idea born from desperation, refined through science, and ultimately left unused. Yet its story continues to fascinate historians and military enthusiasts because it challenges our assumptions about what weapons can be and how far human creativity can go during times of war. As the war moved closer to its final phase, the Bat Bomb project became a quiet footnote inside larger strategic discussions. Documents show that military planners were still refining deployment concepts in early 1945, considering how many bombs would be needed per aircraft and how they would coordinate with existing bombing missions. The vision was not a single strike, but a series of coordinated drops designed to saturate urban targets. Each aircraft could theoretically carry thousands of bats, meaning one mission could release tens of thousands of potential ignition points. The scale of the idea was staggering. Yet the complexity of handling living cargo created constant challenges. Loading procedures required extreme care to keep the bats calm and properly stored. Temperature control had to remain consistent during transport. Ground crews needed specialized training, and maintenance routines were more complicated than those for conventional munitions. Every additional step increased the chance of error. Military logistics experts began to question whether the system could be reliably executed in the fast-paced environment of wartime operations. At the same time, the strategic landscape was changing rapidly. By 1944, Allied forces were gaining momentum in multiple theaters. Air superiority was improving, and conventional bombing campaigns were expanding. Decision-makers increasingly favored weapons that could be mass-produced and deployed with predictable results. Experimental projects, even those with promising test data, faced scrutiny. Resources were limited, and priorities shifted toward technologies that could deliver immediate impact. Public awareness of the bat bomb was virtually non-existent during the war. The project remained highly classified. Only small circles within military research units knew the full details. When reports later surfaced after the war ended, many people were stunned to learn that such a weapon had progressed so far in development. It challenged the common image of World War II technology, revealing how far innovation had stretched in search of advantage. Historians still debate how effective the bat bomb might have been if it had been deployed. Some argue that its unpredictability would have limited its military value. Others suggest that in the right conditions, especially in densely built wooden cities, it could have produced widespread structural fires. What is certain is that the weapon was engineered with serious intent, tested under controlled conditions, and funded at a level that shows it was more than a passing idea. The bat bomb now serves as a reminder of the experimental edge of wartime science. It demonstrates how conflict can accelerate creativity, pushing researchers to combine biology and engineering in unconventional ways. It also highlights how quickly priorities can change when new technologies emerge. In the end, the project was archived, its blueprints stored, its prototypes dismantled, and its story slowly uncovered years later by historians studying declassified records. Even today, the concept continues to spark curiosity because it blurs the line between nature and machinery, between strategy and imagination. It remains one of the most unusual chapters in military development during the Second World War, illustrating just how far planners were willing to go in their search for an unexpected advantage. As research continued behind closed doors, engineers also explored how the system would integrate with existing aircraft operations. The bomb casing was designed to fit within standard payload configurations, meaning it could, in theory, be deployed without requiring entirely new aircraft models. That compatibility was important because wartime production focused heavily on efficiency. Any weapon that demanded a redesign of bombers would have slowed deployment. The bat bomb's designers understood this limitation and worked to keep the structure as adaptable as possible. Meanwhile, animal behavior specialists studied how to minimize stress during transport. They tested different handling methods, experimented with lighting conditions, and refined the cooling system to ensure the bats remained in a controlled state until release. Every detail mattered because the effectiveness of the weapon depended entirely on timing and natural instinct. Once released, the bats would need to awaken, orient themselves, and seek shelter quickly. The success of the concept relied on predictable biological patterns, something that added both innovation and uncertainty to the design. As 1945 approached, strategic priorities shifted once again. Military leadership increasingly focused on weapons that could produce immediate and decisive results. Large-scale bombing campaigns were already reshaping urban landscapes across multiple regions. In that environment, experimental projects faced intense evaluation. Decision-makers had to weigh cost, time, reliability, and overall strategic impact. Even promising prototypes could be sidelined if they did not align with evolving objectives. After the war ended, documentation revealed the full scope of the project to the public. What once had been a highly secret initiative became a subject of historical analysis and debate. Researchers examined test reports, budget allocations, and technical drawings to understand how close the weapon had come to deployment. Some historians view it as a bold example of unconventional thinking under pressure. Others see it as proof of how experimental ideas can emerge during extreme global conflict. The bat bomb remains a striking example of wartime innovation at its most unusual. It combined biology, engineering, and military strategy in a way few other projects ever attempted. While it never entered combat, its development demonstrates the lengths to which nations will go when seeking an advantage. It also highlights the experimental atmosphere of the era, when rapid technological advancement blurred the boundaries between science and warfare. Even decades later, the story continues to capture attention because it challenges expectations about what weapons can be. It represents a moment in history when imagination and necessity intersected, producing one of the most unconventional projects ever seriously pursued during World War II.